Happy New Year! I'm Max Kaiser. Well, welcome to our New Year's Eve Kaiser Report Winter Why Not Special. You know, there's a guy who's got an excellent track record predicting the future. And we've got him on the show right now. The man behind Trends Journal, the most sought-after publication out there by professionals. His name, of course, Gerald Celente of Trends Journal. Gerald, welcome back to the Kaiser Report.
Happy New Year's.
All right, Gerald Celente, we got some predictions to make. Stacy, what's up?
Well, Gerald, on the Kaiser Report, you said years ago, you told us it would start out, the currency wars would lead to trade wars. We have the trade wars going on now. Of course, we have sanctions all over the world. And then you said the trade wars would lead to world war. It does feel like we're heading toward world war. It kind of eased up a little bit at the end of the year with Kerry backing down in terms of Syria. But is 2016 the year we start to actually see world war, or is that for another year?
It may well be if no one's talking peace. For example, 2 weeks ago, they had a debate here in the States on the presidential reality show on the Republican end, and it was on foreign policy. All they talked about is which guy's going to get tougher than the other guy. Oh, and the women too. Carly Fiorina, I'm not going to talk to that Putin, and I'm going to build the Sixth Fleet bigger right in front of his eyes, and I'm going to build a missile defense system right at Russia. I'm saying to myself, not only is she going to be busy doing all this building fleets, building missiles, all they're doing is talking war. Every one of these little guys that couldn't fight their way out of a paper bag is talking about, you know what? Let's see if that sand will glow after we bomb it. Every one of them is talking more war. More boots on the ground. We got to get our allies and fight this ISIS no matter where it is. And every one of them is talking about an escalation. No one is talking about peace.
You know, Gerald, looking back over the previous century, America was in a depression in the 30s, and the common wisdom is that the only way America could get out of that depression was World War II. And I'm looking around the world today, and so many economies are in recession or in depression, and so many industries are collapsing, and you have pockets of extreme poverty throughout America and throughout the world. Is part of the problem this idea that only war can get an economy out of a depression or a recession? In other words, we don't have an example of a recession or a depression being escaped from through peace that anyone can remember. So is that part of the problem? We have a problem of inculcation. People just don't understand that you can have an economy based on peaceful activities.
Yeah, that's part of the problem. And again, you made it perfect. It's the crash of 1929, the Great Depression, currency wars, trade wars, world war, the Panic of '08, the Great Recession, and now we're going into a global recession, currency wars, as the Fed is raising interest rates, and now these emerging markets have to pay back all of that cheap money that they got. Now with devalued currencies, they have to pay it back in dollars, which they can't. The commodity prices are sinking, so they're losing money when they're selling their stuff. So now they're talking trade wars, thinking that because their currencies are going to go down, they're going to be exporting more, but they're not, because people don't have money to buy it. And then world war. When all else fails, they take you to war. That's not one of my empty slogans. It's a fact. Hey, you don't have to look too far. Look out your window and across the channel over there, what happened over there in France when they had that last terror strike. All of a sudden, this little guy, Hollande, his popularity goes up 17% after the attack. We're going to get tough. And then you look at all the people joining the military. Look what happened over here in the States after San Bernardino. Well, you know what the top topic is now? It's not the lousy economy. It's not the fact that people can't find jobs. It's not the fact that all these people that graduated college with these hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt and they can't find a job. That's not the issue. the number one issue here in the United States is terror.
Of course, we're going into 2016, which is an election year in the United States, and you were referring to the last of the Republican primary debates. And in that, Donald Trump, who is the front runner at the moment, he did mention, apparently, like he had no facts that were actually accurate, but he did speak one truth I thought was interesting. What do you think about this? He was asked something along the lines of, would we be better off, America, would we be better off with the dictators in the Middle East, like Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein? And he said, we spent $4 trillion so far. And on what? We could have spent that instead on infrastructure and jobs in America. But, I mean, is that something that actually works with the American population? As you said, they're more afraid, they'd rather spend $4 trillion on weapons and dropping bombs. It seems so bizarre, but they're totally against $4 trillion on themselves or infrastructure, which they need to compete with Europe and Asia. You've been to Europe and Asia. The infrastructure systems there are way more advanced than the dilapidated system in America. So you spent $4 trillion on war and $4 trillion on the currency war, essentially, which is the Fed buying up all the bad debts of the banks. So where do you see in 2016, is this, if Donald Trump is able to say this he is the favorite right now for the Republicans, if him saying, like, you could spend that $4 trillion instead on infrastructure, is that something that might get through?
Yes, but no one's really talking about it. And you just mentioned it. You know, it was one phrase in the whole thing, and then he goes on to the other thing that we got to bomb him, you know, the ISIS. So, and by the way, according to Stiglitz, the Harvard professor that did the study, it's almost $7 trillion now spent in Iraq and Afghanistan. And by the way, no one is talking about why they hate us and why radicalism is formed. For example, the United States and its coalition of the killing have murdered over 1 million Iraqis during this overthrow of Saddam Hussein based on lies. He didn't have weapons of mass destruction, it ties to Al-Qaeda, and no one's talking about that because there were people that knew the facts that he didn't have them, like Scott Ritter, who got blackballed, and others. Number two, the longest war in American history, the Afghan War, totally out of control. So now let's put our minds together for a split second and think, okay, you destroyed my country, I can't get a job, everybody I love is dead, I have no future, I'm a Libyan, I'm a Syrian, I'm an Iraqi, I'm an Afghan, and I forgot Yemen. How could I forget Yemen? Because it's never in the news. The beheaders-in-chief over there, the Saudis, along with the United States and its coalition, are slaughtering the poorest people in the Middle East, and they've done nothing. So now you're a young guy, you have no future in front of you, everything has been destroyed, the people you love have been murdered by foreigners, you think you want to seek revenge? It's never discussed.
You brought up Saudi Arabia. Of course, our relationship with them has backed the dollar, and OPEC has set the price of oil, but the price of oil has collapsed in the past year. We ended the year with Congress now considering removing the export ban. Many people don't know that because America does export the so-called free markets all over the world, but actually American companies have been forbidden from exporting oil. But now we're able to export oil from 2016. So how is that going to impact the Saudi relationship? How is that is that part of the trade wars you see? What do you see going forward on that? That's
going to satisfy of course, what's going on in the States, because there's a huge problem here. When you had that whole shale boom that occurred basically between 2008 to 2014, 2015, early 15, you have to look at all the debt that was piled up. You're looking at the junk bonds. It's about 15 to 20% of them are energy related. And now this stuff is what? Down over 65% since June of 2016. So they're trying to placate all of these banksters and the oil industry in thinking that they're going to be able to salvage a losing deal. And again, it's a much bigger story, because when you're talking about the decline of oil, I mean, you guys know the numbers, you talk about them. What is the commodity index now? At 1999 levels? So you're looking at countries around the world that are rich in natural resources, that were exporting them, that have nobody to buy them anymore, and they have all this debt. So the part about the United States and the Saudis, I don't think there's too much there right now, because the Saudis are still going to pump. And by the way, next year, Iran is going to be flooding the market with more oil. So it's much bigger than that.
Hey, if you can, we can hold Gerald on for a second segment. But before you go, let's start talking a little bit about bankism.
Yeah, let's talk about that in the second half.
Yeah.
I want to finish up on this commodities thing, because, of course, I know you don't make specific calls, but what about, as you pointed out, the commodities index has fallen by 65%. Is this the classic blood in the street moment at the end of 2015? Is this the time to go long? Is this like, can it go any lower?
Yes, it can go lower, because there's a global recession. Look what's going on in Venezuela. What are they running? 200% inflation rate? Look what's going on in Brazil. You see, when you put this all together, Max and Stacy, you're looking at a global recession. Because as Max was talking about bankism, this whole thing has been artificially pumped up with all of this cheap money. Hey, how about those Chinese? What do they call quantitative easing in Chinese? They were the biggest ones to do it. They pumped up their economy falsely. All of these natural resource-rich nations, because China, gobbles up 40 to 50% of the raw materials like copper and iron ore. Iron ore, what was it going for? $200 a metric ton back
All right,
in 2000?
Gerald, we're going to have to cut it off there, and hopefully you can stay on for a second segment, but we'll say goodbye for now. We'll stay tuned for the second half. Thank you so much, Gerald.
Thank you.
All right, well, stay tuned for the second half. Much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Kaiser Report. Happy New Year! Yeah! Woohoo! Well, anyway, let's continue now with Gerald Celente of Trends Journal. Gerald is one of the foremost prognosticators on planet Earth. And this Trends Journal is a must-read. If you're not reading it, you don't know anything about the future. But fortunately, we're going to talk to Gerald about the future and his predictions for the future. And I'm here with Stacey Herbert, of course. Gerald, welcome back.
Oh, thanks for having me back, and Happy New Year's.
All righty. So, Gerald, let's talk about, we finished off before the break talking about bankism and commodity prices. So let's pick it up right there.
Tell us, what is bankism? What is it, and what you have it in your last Trends Journal of 2015. You talk about this and the important topic of it. What is it? Explain it to the audience.
Once upon a time, there used to be a thing called capitalism. It's gone. It's bankism. The banks are in charge of the whole system. Markets don't rise and fall on their own merits. There's no real price discovery. It's all rigged. And that's not a conspiracy theory. Hey, over there in Europe, I got a deal for you. I got these 10-year bonds. We'll call them negative yields. Yeah, you give me money, you loan me money, I'll give you back less than you loaned me. You can't make this up. Negative interest rates going on for almost 10 years, zero interest rates, going on for almost 10 years. The banks are rigging the entire system. They're in control of the world. Capitalism is dead. 4 words, by the way, killed it. For anybody that has a brain between their ears, they could count that high. Too big to fail. In capitalism, there's no such thing. The banks are running the entire world, whether it's the Chinese banks with all their fake dough pumping into the system, whether it's the ECB, whether it's the Fed. Oh, and the other one. They keep making up this story, you know, we have to hit that 2% inflation rate. That 2% inflation when they were forming the Euro group, the currency market, that was set back in the early 90s when inflation was running in Europe at 5%. And the 2% was, you can't exceed 2%. Now they're making up this big lie that we got to keep buying bonds, we got to keep all this money flowing in because inflation's too low.
All right, let's talk about this for a second because you mentioned that capitalism is dead. We now have an era of bankism. Let's talk about something that is germane to capitalism, which we've lost. And that is something called price discovery. So traditionally in a capitalist system, you got buyers and sellers, and based on their actions, there's a price set in the market. Now the problem is, and this is what I think you're talking about with bankism, is that suddenly you've got a class of elites, bankers and kleptocrats who have come in and said, you know what, let's change the rules a little bit. And I'll give you the example of, we're going to say that a foot is no longer 12 inches, but it's 13 inches. And they start to build according to this new standard of a 13-inch foot. And after a couple of years, suddenly everything gets wobbly, everything gets shaky, because they've redefined the entire measurement system according to their objective on top of a system that was not built according to those weights and measures. And now we're at a point where everything is toppling over because they simply decided to redefine what price discovery means. And as a result now, there is no price discovery. It's just a figment of some banker's imagination based on something on a balance sheet that only exists under certain conditions as advised to them by an outside consultant who's completely corrupt.
Amen, brother. You said it. They're making this up. Why are the banks in charge of running the world? You got that guy Draghi over there, you know, the former Goldman Sachs head of the European division. I'll do anything it takes to keep this going. Look at the other guy over there in your country over there, Carney. Carney, you know what the word carny is? That's a slang for carnival man. Yeah, Carney. Yeah, he was at Goldman Sachs too, wasn't he? Oh, wait a minute. Wasn't the guy that made up Too Big to Fail? I think he's playing Frankenstein movies now. Henry Paulson, yeah, under Bush. Oh, I think he was the CEO of Goldman Sachs too. Hey, wait a minute. The guy that killed the Glass-Steagall Act, Robert Rubin. Yep, Goldman Sachs, son of a gun. Oh, wait a minute. The new guy they got over there in running the fraud over there in Australia. Yeah, Turnbull. Oh, yeah, him. Goldman Sachs. Can anybody add it up? The banks are running the world. You're a slave to the banksters. Hey, we just had Christmas time. Remember the guy? Nobody talks about him anymore. Jesus Christ. Yeah, that was his name. I think they called him the Prince of Peace. One time he became violent. He picked up a whip to drive the money changers out of the temple. Nothing's changed.
Will something change? Because you say we've had this bankism. We have seen this since the crash of 2007, 2008. At the end of the year, coming into the end of 2015, going into 2016, we saw manufacturing down in America. The reports came out, 0.6%. Manufacturing is collapsing. The Bank of International Settlements, who is the bankist of them all, well, they said at the end of the year as well, of this year, that, in fact, that the central banks have created so much moral hazard in the banking system that there's so much debt and all of it's going to collapse. Will 2016 be the year it collapses? And if it collapses so soon again, and so many, and we're at near zero, and we're at, the Fed's balance sheet is so huge, and there are no jobs, is this possibly the year that finally Americans decide, hey, we're tired of this? Is it possible?
You know, I thought it would have collapsed a long time ago, and they keep making up new stuff, like negative interest rates. As for the American people, they lost the fight. There's no fight here anymore. The people have lost their courage. They're going to vote again for a lesser of two evils. So there's nothing there right now. It's flat. So there's really, the people have given up. You know, there's a great quote by Andrew Jackson. One man of courage makes a majority. And there are very few people of courage anymore. Everybody's afraid to step out and speak up. And
well, let's talk about courage. Yeah, let's talk about courage for a second, Gerald, because when you mention courage, I think of that classic film that featured the Cowardly Lion. who was accompanying a little girl, Dorothy, in her ruby slippers, and they were on the yellow brick road to meet the Wizard of Oz. Are we going to reveal the central bankers as the Wizard of Oz, and the yellow brick road will reveal itself finally as our savior, that being gold, the only thing that's been money for 5,000 years, and we finally see a return to gold? Is 2016 the year that gold breaks out of its 4-year slumber and returns to the bull market that we all miss so dearly?
Well, it has. But again, the markets are rigged, and that's not a conspiracy theory. They rigged the LIBOR rates, the interest rates. It's a fact. They rigged the Forex markets, the currency markets, where they traded $5.3 trillion a day. And they were convicted of felonies, not charged, convicted. Nobody's head rolled. But just let's go back to gold. In the United States, in last quarter of 2015, demand for gold, bullion, and coins increased over 200%. The central banks, all of them, they're at highs in buying gold in the last quarter. In China, demand up 70%. As things unraveling around Europe, hard buying of gold up 35%. There are two different markets. Going back to the banksters, the criminals in charge. If people got hip to the fact that all of this digital money backed by nothing and printed on nothing was worthless, and there was a run for gold, it would collapse their whole Ponzi scheme. They are going to do everything they can to keep down the price of gold. However, at some point, Ponzi dies. And that's going to be the point when gold rises. Because when you look at the fundamentals of the economy, we're looking at a global recession, we're looking at more cheap money being pumped in and devaluing currencies. Oh, here, let's suppose you're living in Rio and you just lost 40% of your Brazilian real. Would you like to have gold? Hey, you don't have to go too far. Go up there to Canada. What is the loonie down? From 106 back in 1.06 back in 2011 to floating around 70 now? Australia, one country after another. Would you rather hold your worthless dough, or would you rather own gold?
Okay, Gerald, we only have a few moments left, and I want to bring it back to the top of the show, which we're talking about currency war, trade war, world war. There are some positives in terms of ending very decades-long trade wars, and that's with Iran and Cuba. 2015 was a year where we were very surprised by the sudden announcement that Cuba would be brought back into the fold, normalization of relationships with that. Do you see anything positive coming out of that? And will the Iran situation, the normalization there, also change the dynamics with Saudi Arabia, which has been the big problem behind ISIS and all this other war on terror?
I think Saudi Arabia is going to go out of control. They need $100 a barrel to break even with their budget. And we're looking now at Brent, floating around, the 37, 38. So they've got a lot of problems, and plus they're spreading war. I think we're going to have a lot of problems in the Middle East, and they're going to explode. I think what's going on, you would just in Russia, you're going to start looking for more self-sustaining economies. In other words, countries that are big enough that have the natural and human resources to trade within themselves. Do you have to buy shirts, shoes, and computers from China, or could you make them yourself? If you want to buy some nice prosciutto or French wine, yeah, sure, buy that from another country. You're going to start seeing, I believe, more of a economic patriotism in countries that want to become more self-sustaining. And I think that's positive because it's going to start breaking up that globalization chain.
Prosciutto and fine wine, is that what you're having on this New Year's Eve over there at the Trends Journal headquarters in Kingston, New York?
I try to have that every night.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Gerald, thanks so much for being on the special New Year's Eve Kaiser Report. As always, your insights are applauded and appreciated.
Yes, thank you, Gerald. That was quite amazing, and I think it's you had some positive stuff for 2016. I think that's better than just negative.
If you could summarize 2016 trends in 5 words or less, what would it be, Gerald Celente?
More of the same, and we could make it a lot better. You know, there's a great quote by Samuel Adams: it does not take a majority to prevail, rather an irate, tireless minority keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. And you're doing it, we're doing it. We don't need freaks to lead us. We could have a better future if we make it happen.
Thanks, Gerald. That's going to do it for this New Year's Eve special with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Gerald Celente of TrendsResearch.com. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Kaiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.